Hey guys, welcome back. Today is Monday. Hope you guys had an enjoyable weekend, that you stayed safe, practiced your social distancing, washed your hands, did all the good stuff that we need to do as a community to get through this. All right, so not very long video today. All I really wanted to do was to go over the video that I asked you guys to watch on Thursday, which was on outliers. If you remember, it was chapter 9. The video on outliers is only about 10-12 minutes long, so pretty simple. So I'm going to go over that with you real quick, kind of point out the important stuff, give you an assignment for tonight, and we'll call it a day. So let me fix these windows so we can get started. All right, that's better. Okay, so outliers. It's exactly what it sounds like. It is a data point that kind of doesn't go with everything else. It's kind of lying out on one side or the other of a data set. So here, I've written down some numbers. Let's call this, we'll say that I gave a quiz, and I got these 7 scores back from the quiz. All right, so what I want to do is let's answer these questions and see how the outlier affects the results. So let's start with the range. Well, from 0 to 91, my range is 91. It encompasses all the scores. How about the average? Well, to find the average, we need to add up all the scores and then divide by the number of scores there are. So 0 plus 74 plus 78 plus 83 plus 85 plus 90 and plus 91. And then we divide that by 7. And my average is a 71.5. What's the median? Remember, the median is the number that separates the data into equal parts on the low side and on the high side. So since there's 7 numbers, this guy right here is going to be directly in the middle. So 83 is my median. Is there a mode? No, nothing shows up more than once, so all of them, I guess you could say, would be the mode. And what's my outlier? Well, obviously, looking at this, we got one schlep who didn't study and got a 0 on the quiz. So my outlier is 0. Now, it's easy to point out what the outliers are, but the important thing that you guys need to remember about this is how it affects measures of center. Now, we talked about measures of center. In fact, we've got them pretty much all right here, mean, median, and mode. We could also put in here standard deviation if we wanted to, because standard deviation, as we saw before, also measures or also talks about numbers in the center and how far away from the center each standard deviation is. So when we look at this, the question really is, when you have an outlier, what does it affect and what doesn't it affect as far as measures of center? Well, range, we can that's irrelevant. We don't have to worry about range because that's more of a measure of spread than anything else. But I do want to look at mean, median in particular. Well, the mean of these scores is 71.5, which would be way here, right? And the median, of course, is 83. What you're going to find with outliers is that it affects the average, because when you have one score that is way off to the left or way off to the right of the rest of the numbers, that's going to mess up your average or your mean. So mean is going to be affected. Does it affect the median? No, not at all, because 83 is still my center number. So if this is 0, this could be 5, it could be 10. Even on the other side, I could have a score of 200, hypothetically, and that would not affect the median. So when you have an outlier either to the left or far to the right, median is not affected. So median stays the same. Mode is not affected. What about the standard deviation? Yeah, the standard deviation would be affected, because remember, the standard deviation says this 68% of all scores fall between this number and this number. So if you have an outlier, that's going to affect what 68% of the scores are, and it's going to skew off the standard deviation. Plus, the other thing you want to remember too, guys, and we mentioned this when we were talking about standard deviation, is that you really only rely on standard deviation to help you interpret numbers if the distribution is even, like this. When you have an outlier, such as we have here, my distribution is going to be skewed. So a distribution for this might look more like that, where you've got this 0 way over here, and then the rest of the stuff is way to the right. So in a case where it's not evenly distributed, it's not equal on both sides, you're not really going to use the standard deviation that much. So the important thing to remember about outliers, it affects the average or the mean. So if you have a data set, a list of numbers, for example, Mr. Rivera sends me an email and says, hey, give me kind of a rundown of how your quiz went. I'm not going to give her the average of these quiz scores because this 0 really throws it off. The number that I would give her, I would say, hey, Mr. Rivera, the median score of my quizzes was an 83, because that's a better representation of how a majority of the class did without that one outlier. So it affects the average. It does not affect the median. Would it affect the interquartile range? No. If you were doing a box and whisker plot, it would not affect the interquartile range, because Q1 is still going to be in the same space, which would be right about here, and Q3 would be in the same space, which is right about here. So if we were to do a box and whisper, our box would be right here, kind of encompassing these values here in the middle. So an outlier would not affect the box. It would affect the whisker, because I would have a long line all the way to 0 and maybe a short line whisker here to 91. So if this was 0 and this was 91, I can see my interquartile range doesn't change. My whisker does. So in summary, range you don't have to worry about. The important thing, it affects the average. Outliers affect the average a great deal. So if you were to get a test question and it gave you a set of data points and you see an outlier there and the question says, what would be the best measure of center to use? You'd want to use the median. That is not affected at all by outliers. Okay, great. So that was pretty much it in a nutshell on outliers. I'm going to give you guys a small worksheet to do. Remember, I try to give you 2 a week, so we'll get one out of the way here early. I'm going to post it on the classroom. And it looks like this. Oh, let me fix the window. Hang on one second. All right, there we go. So this is, you got 2 problems on here. So you've got the heights of the boys in his brother's karate class, and it asks you to calculate mean, median, mode, range, and determine are there any outliers. Then you've got another set of data points here, but this time they're listed as a dot plot, and it asks you these questions. So I want to give you guys your best shot. These are pretty simple. Just do that, and then on tomorrow's video, I will go over the correct answers for this. This wraps up Chapter 9. So we're going to take a Chapter 9 test at some point this week. I'm thinking probably on Thursday we'll do the test. But for tonight, just go ahead and do this worksheet. Again, if you want to turn it in, you can do so. Just do it on a separate sheet of paper. Take a picture with your cell phone and email me the email me the picture. Don't forget, guys, real important, make sure that when you are watching these videos on YouTube that you put your name and your period number in the comments so that I can mark you present for attendance, because I am using that as my attendance. And for you guys that have not turned in last week's assignments, which I believe was measures of spread and the standard deviation worksheet, guys, you got to get that stuff turned in, because those are grades and those are the only things that I have to be able to grade you on. All right? Guys, have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.